Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to St. Paul's Episcopal Church. My name is Charlie Dupree, and I am the rector. I have been here since 2019. I got here about 3 months before the pandemic. And over the 3 years of the pandemic, we have seen a lot of adaptations and changes in the Lenten speaker series. But we are so glad to have you here today to keep the tradition going, a tradition that legend says has been going since 1897. 1897. And the mission of our series is to cultivate a loving community, to create spaces in which we think about our lives as spiritual human beings that are dependent and responsible for one another, and of course to provide a tasty meal and good hospitality. We're glad that you're here. Please join me in a prayer. With the rising of the sun, life rises again within us, O God. In the dawning of the morning light, you lead us from the mists of the night into the clarity of the day. In the new light of this day, bring us to a clearer knowing of the mystery that first bore us from the dark. Bring us to a clearer knowing of the love from which we are all born. Amen. Well, folks, this is the last of this particular series, and it is a joy to welcome you here. If you're here for the first time, welcome. If you're returning, welcome back. Just a few notes. Next week, here in the Episcopal Church, in our tradition, we will observe Holy Week. And then, of course, that leads directly into the great celebration of Easter Day. And I just want you to know that you're all invited to any of those services, to continue on that journey, and of course to join us on Easter Day. Information about all of our services can be found on our website, stpaulsrva.org. Also, you were given when you entered a simple questionnaire. We would love to know what you would find interesting in future Lenten series, in speakers, in topics. Anything that you would like to tell us, we would love to know. And it will inform some of our decision making about how future series will unfold. And if I forget at the end of this speech today to tell you this, there is going to be a bread tasting over in Scott Hall immediately following our speaker today. Wow, what a journey we've been on. We've heard from Kea. We heard about her transition from India to Richmond. We heard from Lance Lemon, Rich Wine RVA. We heard from Michael Lindsay, 7 restaurants in 2.5 years. And last week we heard from Hamadullah Nouri, an Afghan refugee who came here and is dedicated to service and to serving others. And today we have Evin Dogu. Evin co-owns Sub Rosa Bakery in Church Hill with her brother Evrim. The daughter of Turkish immigrants and a Louisiana native, Evin was instilled with a lot of diverse food from an early age. Her love of baked goods and interest in diverse cultures and languages led her to live and travel to places like Italy and Turkey, where she frequented many bakers and bakeries. I did a little search. The patron saint of bakers and pastry chefs is Saint Honoratus, 6th century bishop. And word has it that when the person who found out first that he was named bishop was in the process of cooking, was in the process of baking, and she said, I will believe that Honoratus was elected bishop when I plant this knife in the ground and it takes root and grows a tree. And lo and behold, that's what happened. So today, Evin is here to talk about her journey and all of the ways that she has made Richmond a beautiful and delicious place for us all. Please help me welcome Evin.
Yes.
All right. Evin, again, welcome to St. Paul's. We're so glad that you're here to kind of round out the series that has been so successful and so interesting. We're here to talk about the spirituality of food, the spirituality of eating, hanging out, cooking. What happens when we come together to do that? And I don't know if all of you know, too, that we've had a book group going at St. Paul's where we've had a small group come together weekly to explore those topics as well. And I'm going to talk a little bit and pull from that book today. But Evin, tell me a little bit. We talked about how to pronounce your name.
Yes.
Tell us about your name and how to pronounce it.
How to pronounce it? So there's two pronunciations. The Turkish pronunciation is a little tricky if you're not Turkish. It's Evin Dogu, so the G is silent. But the American pronunciation, which I'm perfectly happy with, is a little more elongated. It's Evin, and the last name is Dogu. So I just don't do the silent G, because that's kind of a tricky sound if you're not used to it.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. But Evin, kind of like an
Yep,
A.
exactly.
All right.
Yeah.
And your brother, Evrim?
Yeah,
Is that right?
Actually, similarly, my brother's name is pronounced Evrim in Turkish, and I should use that pronunciation since I speak Turkish, but I always tend to just say Evrim, almost like Ephraim. But it's, Evrim or Evrim.
All right.
Yeah.
Tell us about your Turkish roots, your Turkish background, and how do you bring that into what you do today?
Yeah, well, it definitely has a huge influence on what I do today. My mom and dad were born in Turkey and immigrated to the States, and my brother and I were born here, but we spent our childhoods going to Turkey a lot. We had grandparents come and live with us. We were exposed to Turkish food. It's pretty much what we ate on a daily basis. And we grew up just with a love of eating food, eating Turkish food. We spoke Turkish. That was actually our first language before we went to school. And I would say that the sense of hospitality and strong food culture in Turkey has had a huge impact on the profession I chose and just kind of who I am as a person.
And is baking a large part of that culture, that food culture?
It's huge. There's a bakery on every corner of every street in Turkey. Baked goods are ubiquitous and very loved. Anytime you go to a friend's house, you bring a baked good. Turkish people are really into sweet pastries and baked goods as well as savory. So they are so into baked goods that they have dedicated bakeries that will just specialize in one thing. For example, a börek, a flaky phyllo dough pastry that is filled with meat or cheese or spinach, and you have places in Turkey that just sell those. So yeah, it's a big part of the culture.
All right. And how did you know, have you always wanted to be a baker? Or did you start off as like a scientist? Because we'll talk about baking. And
funny enough, I'm terrible at science. It was always my worst subject in school. I didn't always want to be a baker. I always loved eating pastries and bread. I don't think I even knew that what I was eating was a pastry, but my mom would make böreks, or my grandmother would bring over some pide, and it was always my favorite thing to eat. I think that the eating and the love of eating came first, and my brother had a huge influence on the actual wanting to become a baker part of things.
Okay, and again, maybe I missed it.
I might not have answered it.
Where were you born?
Oh, so I was born in Baton Rouge, Louisiana.
Okay.
Yeah.
And when did you find your way to Richmond?
I moved to Richmond a little over 10 years ago, after living in a lot of different places, mainly to open the bakery with my brother Evrim.
Oh, was he already here?
He was already here, yeah.
Okay.
He went to college here, and he also lived in other places, but spent most of his years here after high school. He went to college at VCU, and he was already here baking bread out of my dad's pizza oven and hauling it all the way to Richmond to sell in his hatchback Volkswagen. And that's how everything started.
In Louisiana?
Yeah, so we were all in Louisiana. We moved as a family to Northern Virginia, so that's the Virginia connection. We both went off and did our own things. He stayed in Richmond after college, and then I joined him 10 years ago in Richmond. Yeah.
And Louisiana has its own food culture.
Yes, very much so.
Why not open, I mean, did you get kind of influenced by Louisiana cooking?
I did. I thought about, before speaking to you today, I was thinking about, the ways in which food is so important and why it's so important to me and why I love it so much. And I do think that the Louisiana food culture, it's such a strong, I don't know if you've ever been down there, but it's a huge part of the culture, and it has a unique food culture, I know, I think that growing up in a place like that with its own foodways and food systems definitely had an influence on me.
Okay. All right, so we need to pause on I work with my brother.
Okay.
Have y'all always gotten along? How's that going?
My mom's here today in the crowd. We can ask her.
Yeah.
We have, actually. We've always gotten along. We definitely fought when we were kids and pulled each other's hair until one would give up, and those kinds of things. But we got along. I'd like to say that, until college, it was more my brother wanting to hang out with my friends and me kind of being like, okay. But once we were adults, we would, even though we didn't live in the same places, we would see eye to eye on a lot of things. And I always enjoyed, got emotional suddenly, I always enjoyed spending time with him. And then when he wanted to open the bakery, a couple things happened. I didn't just, drive to Richmond and say okay, but it kind of seemed natural and organic to join him.
Yeah, and how far apart are you in years?
I'm 3 years older.
3 years older, okay. Yeah. Neat. Yeah, I always love to hear about sibling stories because they're so different and can play out so differently.
That's true. Yeah, very true.
So he had a vision for this bakery here.
Yes.
And was it always in Churchill?
It wasn't always in Churchill, but I don't know if it's the first place he lived in Richmond. Probably not, because he lived in the dorms. But within the 4 years that he was here for college, he lived in Churchill. So he did love the neighborhood. And I would visit him sometimes. I went to school an hour away, and I also loved Churchill. But it was really just good fortune and coincidence that we ended up in Churchill.
Okay,
yeah.
Sweet. And tell us about the name.
That is a cool story, too. So my brother came up with a name, and the way he tells it is that he used to get a word a day, so learning vocabulary. And years ago, he had come across the word Sub Rosa and thought it was a really interesting word. It means secrecy or under the rose. I guess during the Roman Empire, they would have these secret meetings in rooms with the rose painted on the ceiling. And years later, when he was baking bread out of my dad's oven and thinking of the fact that he wanted to become a baker professionally and have a name for his bakery, he remembered that word, Sub Rosa, and thought, well, this is the perfect word for what I'm doing. I'm going in at night when everyone's gone, baking bread. You have to be on a subscription list to get my bread. So he thought that Sub Rosa would be the perfect name to kind of describe what was going on. And we just decided to keep it.
Yeah, I like that. Now, we talked a little, or I asked Michael Lindsay this a couple of weeks ago. The being a baker, loving to bake, loving to create food, and opening a bakery are two very different things. Are you more the business are you both kind of the business people and the artist people? Were you scared?
Yes.
Tell it, what were you scared of?
I mean, I was scared of failure. I really didn't have a lot of experience baking. I had lots of experience eating pastries, and I knew what was delicious, I think. But we didn't have a lot of time. I especially didn't have a lot of time. I had just moved back from Turkey and kind of decided to work on this bakery project with my brother. And while he had been baking bread for a few years and was starting to do the build out for the oven and the space, it was my turn to learn how to make pastries. So it was such a short period to learn. I didn't have the time or money to go to school, and I was nervous about just not being able to make a good product. But then once we started, I worked at a few bakeries as an apprentice and started practicing and baking in the wood-fired oven and selling it at the farmer's market, and I saw how excited people were getting. I got less nervous. And then once we opened the bakery, the nerves shot up again, but things were pretty successful from the get-go. It worked out.
All right. I want to talk a little bit about that excitedness.
Sure.
Right? Which kind of, I think, helps us focus, move our focus from the technical to the spiritual. What do you want people to experience when they eat your baked goods?
That's a great question. I think I'll start by saying I'd like people to sort of fall in love. I'd like them to take a bite of bread or croissant or even drink the coffee and just stop for a moment, like I do when I eat something delicious and what I think is almost perfect, and just fall in love with what they're experiencing. I'd love people to be able to have all their senses heightened when they're in the bakery and smell all of the bread and kind of see what goes into everything as much as they can from, the pastry case, and just kind of connect with the timelessness that is bread and that is baking. It's been around for 10,000 years, bread, and so I'd love for people to, even if they're not actively thinking about it, maybe just sense that they're part of a long tradition of something really special.
Yeah, and so do you feel that connection when you're in there in front of that oven?
I do. I mean, I'm not going to lie, like I've been doing it for 10 years, and there are times where I might not feel the connection. I'm tired. But I think overall, I do feel that connection, especially when I was more actively baking in front of the oven. I was the first one there for several hours. I think most bakers probably can connect to that feeling of it's dark, it's just you, and if you're in a wood-fired bakery like we are, the wood-fired oven, and you're just baking pastries and bread, it's quiet, there's no one else out. I think I forgot the question. I don't even know if I answered it.
I did too, but you did great.
I did connect. I do connect to it. I love eating. I never get tired of eating our pastries and bread, and it's very rewarding and fulfilling work.
Yeah, I was thinking, because I watched the video on the Facebook post that we posted. If you haven't seen that, look at it. It's really a well done piece, and it shows kind of the arc of what these folks do. We live in a world of now. We live in a world of right now. We aren't good at delayed gratification. So this is what I was thinking when I was watching that video. Wood-fired oven, you got to heat it up the day before.
Yes.
To get it ready for the next day.
Yes.
And then you got to clean it out in order to put the bread in it. All right?
Yeah.
So that's hard thing number one. Hard thing number two, you could go buy flour, but you don't. You grill, what do you do?
Mill it.
Mill it yourself.
Yeah.
All right. And then, I was looking at the croissant fella he was like, oh, we make it one day, it rests one day, and then that's a 3-day process.
Yeah.
So can you talk about, chronologically, here in the church, we have two different kinds of time. We have chronos time, like on your watch, chronology, and we have kairos time, which is more of God's time. And I feel like you hover in between both at the bakery, because you can't rush the process, right?
No, not if you want certain results.
Might that be another thing that people connect to?
Yeah, I think so. I love that concept of the two different times. I think that, do you mean as bakers or consumers,
as
or both?
bakers, I feel like you're in kind of a spiritual space when you are saying, slow down, it's not ready yet.
It's true, and that is, like, as someone who's a little impatient like myself, it was hard to learn that you do have to be very patient. My brother will always say, bread waits for no man or woman or person, and it's true. You kind of are dictated, your day is determined by how quickly the bread is fermenting, the temperature in the room, the temperature of the dough. So, and the hours are very long. Bakery and baking hours are definitely not something you can say, okay, I punch in at 9 and I'm leaving at 5. The bread might not want that.
Yeah.
Or need that.
You're like, bread,
Yeah.
dang it.
Yeah.
Ugh, I need to be somewhere.
Yeah, exactly.
Your brother used the term connectedness a lot in the video, and that's another place where I was driving with that process. We, in this book, we read an essay by Wendell Berry, and Wendell Berry is a naturalist, he's a theologian, and he's kind of the bomb.com when it comes to theology of nature. And he asked the question, what can we do? What can we do to be more connected to the food that we eat? And here are a few things, and I think you all do them. You can participate in food production to the extent that you can. Grow things, bake things, right? Prepare your own food. Learn the origins of the food you buy, and buy the food that is produced closest to your home. Whenever possible, deal directly with the local farmer. Learn as much as you can of the economy and technology of industrial food production. Learn what is involved in best farming practices. And learn as much as you can of the life histories of the food species. So I feel like that is a thing for y'all. That seems to be a guiding principle. Yeah? So say more about that. I'm sure you could cut corners.
It's true. There are ways to cut corners, and in some situations maybe it's necessitated, but I think we do most of those things. It's pretty important to us. We're lucky that we live in a state like Virginia that has a bounty of things to offer. We have so much fresh and local produce and even grain. A lot of our grain comes from farms that are just 30 minutes to 45 minutes away. We do try to, not just because it's kind of the in thing, but I think it really makes a difference in the product. It's delicious to eat food that is grown from a farm nearby, and to mill your own flour. We weren't going to do that originally, but then we tried bread with freshly milled flour, and there was just such a difference that we wanted to make that investment.
Yeah, and I think too you used the phrase, there's a connection to the bread, even in the oven. Like the bricks create a quality of bread that you might not get, from. I remember my first baking experience involved those cinnamon buns, that you pop.
Oh yeah, I remember those.
Delicious.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, it's true. I mean, that's what's great about it. It doesn't have to be this, thing that's up here. I mean, we all, I think, even if it's just popping cinnamon buns out of the little roll, I think we can all connect to baked goods. I mean, we all grew up eating some version of it. I remember eating grocery store croissants and thought they were like the most delicious thing I'd ever had. So that is something cool about food in general, but especially baked goods. I think it really does bring people together, and everyone can relate to it.
Yeah. Now, do you think the baking world or the kind of the food business world is still largely driven by men? Have you ever encountered any sort of, you work with your brother, and have you ever felt any kind of resistance or pushback because you are a woman?
No, I haven't really felt any pushback or resistance, and I think now it seems like there's a lot of men and women represented in baking. I think initially, I'm not sure how much it had to do with the fact that my brother was baking in front of the oven almost every day. He was much more visible, and I was doing pastry in the kitchen. But there were some times in the beginning where people would just assume my brother was the sole owner, or they would forget to acknowledge me in awards being given. That was strange. I don't know how much of it was me being a woman versus me just not actually physically being in front of the oven for the first few years. But other than that, I would say that I've felt embraced, and I haven't felt like there have been too many difficulties stacked up against me in that way.
Okay.
Yeah.
How many of you out there consider yourself like bakers? Okay. How many of you consider yourselves cooks? How many of you think there's a big difference between the two? Yeah. What's the difference?
Well, I guess I'll repeat what I've heard a lot of people say, and it's true. People will say baking is a science. There's not a lot of room for error. Once everything's put together and you throw it in the oven, if you messed up, you can't really fix it. Whereas if you're cooking and you didn't add enough salt, you can add a little more. If you added too much salt, you can add a little more tomato or more ingredients to cover it up. With baking, once you're done assembling, it's over. And if you made a mistake, you have to start all over again from the beginning. So I think that's the biggest difference. That and the copious amounts of flour and butter used.
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe in Louisiana, people do use a lot of flour and butter in their cooking, but yeah, I think baking has the gold medal on that.
Yeah. Some people definitely would consider they love the science part of it. They like the specificity.
Yes.
Like do this, but it's still intuitive.
It is. Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. And I think that you can teach someone and show someone a recipe, but if they don't develop that intuition, it might not come out the way they want.
Yeah. I'm going to go out and we're going to take a few questions from the audience. Please raise your hands. As I go out, tell us about your best cooking disaster.
That I'm personally responsible for, or somebody else?
Whichever, you choose.
Let's see. Well, I will think the worst disaster at the bakery, I think, was when somebody, I'm just going to say somebody, forgot to put salt and sugar in the croissant dough. And for any of you who have been to Sub Rosa, a lot of what we do is croissants. So we couldn't sell any croissants that day. We sold bread, coffee, tarts, and cookies. This was when we first opened. So that was a pretty big disaster. I guess that's the one that sticks out. I'm sure there's other little things, but
One springs to mind.
Yeah.
We love Sub Rosa,
thank you.
I thought I would like to know if you could tell just a quick story about the fire and about how Churchill rallied around. We were in the line when it reopened, and it was wrapped all around the block. So I would love for you to tell, out of that disaster, it was truly a disaster.
It was,
Churchill rallied, and I just like, and also, you're beautifully fit for someone who eats a lot of pastries, and I'm not supposed to be, but I'm envious.
Oh. I think most bakers don't stop moving. I think that's for now, that's what's working in our favor. But thank you for bringing that up. I almost thought, should I talk about that as being the biggest disaster? It wasn't related to the bakery. It was a cigarette fire. When we first opened, 3 months after we opened our doors, 10 years ago, there was a cigarette fire, and we got a phone call in the middle of the night that the bakery was on fire. It seemed like a bad dream, nightmare. We rushed over, and lo and behold, at that point, the firefighters had put the fire out, but we had to close for almost a year. And during that time, yeah, I mean, I hope I don't start getting too emotional talking about it, but yeah, Churchill, there was a customer who walked by the next day and said, "Can I start a GoFundMe?" I had never even heard of GoFundMe, and we said, okay. He raised over $10,000. The Roosevelt across the street had a big event for us. Dutch & Company opened their doors and let us use their kitchen, not only the next day to bake all the pastries that we couldn't bake, but for the whole year up until we reopened. Hardywood had a huge event for us. We had little kids making signs and posting them on the bakery, and yeah, I mean, to have a community want you to reopen so badly and raise money for you, it was just very touching. Yeah, and thank you for being one of those people.
So another challenge, what did you do different during the pandemic to keep rolling?
That's another really good question. We were lucky. My brother's good with computers. I'm not. So once the pandemic happened, or as we were hearing about what was going on, we immediately turned our bakery into an online-only bakery where you had to order online and pick up your food outside. And it was challenging at first, just having to change everything around like that. But I think because bakery items lend themselves to being to-go, and a lot of people get to-go anyway, it kind of worked for us. And even though our business wasn't as busy as we used to be during the pandemic, we still stayed afloat, and we were all right. Yeah.
I read that you also studied baking in Italy, and where was that, and what did you learn about baking there?
So I actually didn't study baking. I ate a lot of baked goods there. I really don't want to minimize how much eating pastry for my whole life has helped me be where I am. But I studied abroad in Rome in a neighborhood called Trastevere, beautiful old neighborhood, and there were bakeries on every corner, just like in Turkey, so I would go and get a cappuccino, and I think they call them cornetto. They're sort of like croissants, I guess, pretty similar. I always swore they had orange zest in them, but my Italian friend said that that's not true. But yeah, so I just spent a lot of time during those 6 months eating the pastries, and that was about it. I did take some baking classes when I lived in Turkey, but yeah.
Hi, also a big fan of Sub Rosa. One of the things that has stuck with me since being there is the option to purchase a loaf of bread that you guys then donate. So I was just curious about that inspiration, where it goes, when you guys started that program.
Yes, thank you for asking that. I believe that my brother found out that during the pandemic there were bakeries that were starting the community loaf program, where the pandemic hit a lot of people pretty harshly, and a lot of bakers rallied together and thought, well, the one thing we can do is at least try to help feed people. So we started that ourselves with the help of one of our former bakers, Maddie, and basically if you wanted to donate $5 toward a community loaf as a customer, we would then provide once a week the community loaves through organizations like MAD RVA. And we did that throughout the pandemic. And we had a little bit of a hiatus due to some organizational issues with some of the organizations we were working with, but we've just started that back up again. And once a month we do the community loaves.
Hi, I just wanted to say how humble you're being, because I've was a professional chef for 20 years, and I think your establishment is by far one of the greatest here in Richmond, so thank you.
Thank you.
And I also feel that your croissants are the best this side of the Atlantic. So
thank you.
My question is, where did you learn how to make croissants? Because those are, you truly go to the effort of making a beautiful croissant, and it is done the traditional way. And so
thank you so much. Well, I learned a few different ways. I started making them on my own. They weren't that great at first, and then I was able to apprentice at several bakeries One was Banquet in New York. One was Farm and Sparrow in Asheville, North Carolina. And then a lot of it was just also trial by error and by fire, I guess. And I have to say, the combination of apprenticing and also the bakers that have been working with us over the years have helped improve it. So I think it's just a combination of all those things. Tartine Bakery was another bakery. I didn't learn from them necessarily, but I had a chance to work in their kitchen for a few weeks and use a lot of their recipes as a base. So that was another inspirational place for sure. So it was kind of all of those things coming together. And I think, like, I keep talking about how much I ate croissants, but I think that helps. Like, then you know what you're looking for because you have enough of a base of what's out there. Yeah.
One of the reasons we came up with the theme of Around the Table is because we really do believe that things change when we come around the table. And what's happening in Richmond in our food vocation right now, I do believe comes from people's hearts. So I know you've fed a lot of people. How does the community feed you?
Well, I guess, initially with the post-fire, I mean, that was a direct way that the community fed us. But I think just by, showing up at the bakery, even when the weather's bad or the line is long, and being a patron, I think by vocalizing how much they appreciate us in the bakery, almost any time I'm out front, I run into a customer that will either share how great of an experience they're having, or they'll just feed me by being kind to me and hospitable to me. So it kind of feels like I'm just at home. I think events like this and being asked to speak and just being acknowledged and recognized by so many people in the community, I would say definitely makes me feel like we're fed, quote unquote. We've gotten so much, so many people work so hard in their lives and don't get as much recognition as we have. And I feel very fortunate to have a community, like a reciprocity where we're in a place we love. We love Churchill, and people both in Churchill and outside of Churchill, outside of the state, will come and reciprocate all the hard work we're doing back to us by showing up.
Great.
Yeah.
Evin has brought some bread, and it is available in Scott Hall. So I invite you to go there. If you pre-ordered your lunch, you can pick that up and eat in Scott Hall. And if you didn't, you can still stop by, get a piece of bread, chat with Evin. I know she would love to meet you. Yeah. First, thank you to all of you. Thanks for being here over these last 5 weeks. Thanks for being here during this journey of Lent that we've been on together. And thank you for coming around the table with me and some of these really important figures in our community. Please help me thank Evin. Remember that life is short, and we do not have much time to gladden the hearts of those with whom we share this journey. So make haste to love and be quick to be kind. And may the blessing of the Holy One rest upon you all in this moment and forevermore. Amen. Have a beautiful day. If you'd like to make a contribution to the series, there's a very handsome gentleman in the back holding up a silver platter.